Working live.
In a world where heathen art was cheap and had too many helmets with horns on them, where it was hard to tell the difference between a painting dedicated to Odin and Freya from a Boris Vallejo fantasy art calendar, a world of chainmail bikinis and blonde Marvel Thor, one man stood up and said no. That man is Sam Flegal. This episode of Heathen Talk is brought to you by Sam Flegal at FaithfulSigns.com, featuring Norse mythology-themed art that explores the various legends and traditions of the ancient Germanic peoples. Faithful Signs offers prints, bags, and original art for sale from everyone from those interested in Norse mythology right up to a serious art collector. We'd like to thank Sam Flegal for his support of the show and his contributions to modern heathen art.
Well, welcome to Heathen Talk, folks. My name is Lauren, and I don't know why that commercial is clicking, but it will get fixed in post, as we say. If you get this in the archive,
Lauren, you got to get up on your mic.
Oh, I'm having to get used to some stuff here. Anyway, having a little problem with my audio setup apparently tonight, but once again, welcome to Heathen Talk. If you are listening to us right now live, don't do anything else, but since you're already on YouTube, subscribe to us. Also, we're on social media, still trying to get Ninkasi to give Josh some booze. So go over there, check out our social media at Heathen Talk, at Heathen_talk on. Yeah. I'm sorry, guys.
You want me to take over, Lauren? I can.
Oh, God, please. Twitter, thank you.
So, like Lauren was saying, if you want to talk to us on Twitter, it's at Heathen_talk. Facebook is Heathen Talk. Facebook.com/Heathen Talk. Go on iTunes, leave us a review. They help us get out there to other podcast listeners, especially since we're no longer even remotely a new podcast, so we're no longer at the top of the list. Check us out at our website, heathentalk.com. We have Tumblr. Make Marc happy. Go follow us on Instagram. We don't post very often, but, why not? And like Lauren was saying, we got Sam Flegal with us tonight.
Howdy.
The myth, the legend.
So, before we get kicked off, we're going to go into our
toast, Josh?
Yes, that's the word. Apparently my brain is not working either.
We're all doing great tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
We're toasting a heathen who's fairly local to me. He goes by Michael Weston on the Facebooks. And he recently lost his wife and is having a bit of a rough time, even though he's coping. And I figured since he's heathen and we're heathen and he could use some encouragement, we would give him some on the show tonight. So, Michael, this is to you.
We're sorry for your loss, sir.
Sorry for your loss.
Bill.
So, Toby, what are you drinking?
So a couple weeks ago, I was in Portland. I picked up a couple of Burnside brews. This is the oatmeal pale, which is a combination that I've never had before, and will probably never have again.
Burnside can be hit and miss.
Mm-hmm.
Their rye, though, their spring rye is fantastic.
I do like a good rye.
Sam, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking Red Stripe Jamaican-style lager.
Oh. I love Red Stripe. It's a great summer beer. I don't know why you're drinking it in March, but hey.
I only like lagers, man. So.
Mm-hmm.
Confession time. I've never had a Red Stripe ever in my life.
Oh, yeah?
It's true. Lauren, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking a vintage 2016 Diet Dr. Pepper.
I heard that was a good year.
Really is very sweet, very carbonated.
I hear the aspartame really brings out some oaky notes.
And the cancer too. So
A little bit of stone fruit.
So, Thorin, it's your turn, sir.
Yeah, I'm drinking No Lies Copper Donkey because why not? And I'm still not sure what to make of it. I only opened it right before we went on air, and the last thing I had going in my mouth was spicy pad thai. So I'm thinking that every drink I take has tasted a little bit better, and I'm thinking it wasn't mixing well with the pad thai. But it's very much like, I'm going to say it's like a ghetto barley wine. It's like they got a lot of the taste characteristics of barley wine without actually going through the process of making a barley wine. So it's not terrible, but I don't know that I go out of my way to have it again.
Fair enough. As everybody who listens knows, we've had, thanks to Toby, a bit of a hashtag campaign to get me beer. And I would just like to point out to any Ninkasi people who happen to be listening because we've been annoying them with our tweets, I had to travel all the way to Seattle to get a bottle of this. I live in the same town as your brewery, so maybe you should just give me some ground control.
Come on, guys, fix yourselves.
It's time to give Josh beer.
It's time.
It's time.
And it is a wonderful beer. It is fantastic.
That stuff is delicious.
So, we've got Sam Flegal here tonight. Sam, what you been up to? It's been a couple months since we've seen you in. Why don't you tell us what you've been up to?
Man, all right. I can't remember. I think it was like November last time I was on the show with Brian Marshall, and we talked about being heathen artists. But really, back in December and January, I decided to do take the Hávamál and try and do a drawing each day for 31 days. It ended up, because of the holidays, breaking up to be a little bit longer than 31 actual days, but I kept it going. I managed to do about 20 consecutively. And so then I just launched a Kickstarter, which is going crazily successful. When we originally talked about maybe having me on the show to talk about what it was like to interpret the Hávamál, I think I'd done like 2 or 3 drawings when we talked back at around Yule time, or actually it was Brian's wedding, Brian and Renee's wedding we were at. Yeah, it feels a little strange to be in this space now, having it been so successful so quickly. I kind of expected to be on the show and being like, guys, please support my project. I want to get this thing funded. But it was funded in less than 36 hours. So, yeah, it's been a wild couple of months, but really good.
I would like to think that
They still won't take my money.
I would like to think the reason you were funded so quick is because you advertised on Heathen Talk, and
That's
our listeners gave you all of their money.
We should talk about that some. So I do advertise on Heathen Talk, but it came about because I listen to your guys' show, particularly while I paint, while I work. I have these long stretches, so I actually listen to a lot of podcasts. And all the various podcasts usually have a Patreon of some kind, which is basically the online tip jar. And so I logged in and I was like, man, I'm gonna throw a couple bucks their way, and I just was looking at the reward tiers, and you guys have a reward tier for $25 a month. You could advertise. I thought, man, that's super easy. Like, I'm just gonna give it a shot. So yeah, I'm happy to do it. But for people listening, we want to say, if you guys do enjoy this show, throw $1 in the hat. If you guys dig what they're doing here at Heathen Talk, I think it's so important what these guys are doing, particularly the wide range of voices that you get on Heathen Talk. A lot of Heathen shows tend to lean politically one direction or another, and I feel like you guys represent a pretty wide range, particularly with some of the ladies' episodes coming in. I can't think of a Heathen-related project where you'd have 4 or 5 women, all who seem very fascinating, but exceptionally strong and good at what they do, talking about heathenry so openly as well. And I just think it's important that we make sure that this keeps happening. So, I mean, just $1 really helps these guys out. If you notice, they're starting to get fancy microphones and things, and that's all because of you guys. So I just think this is really important what you guys are doing.
Thank you very much. We've been using the Patreon money to fund our hosting bills, to make sure that the people that we collaborate with do get something back for what they're doing to help out. We're working with a musician who's working on some intro and outro music for us, and we've decided to kick some funds collectively his way as a way of just making sure that everybody gets something out of this. So if you like what we're doing and you do like to see the additional stuff that we're doing, appreciate it. And thank you for pimping our Patreon.
Well, absolutely, because I mean, you guys, I also host a web show, and I know that at a certain point it always feels like, you guys keep saying please help out on Patreon, but I think it's important that you know that your listeners there. And I saw you guys just hit a milestone, right? You guys just hit $100 a month, so that's pretty badass.
And that means that.
Yeah, he mentioned it out loud.
You said it out loud.
But so let's be fair here.
Yeah.
The $100 a month is with your help, Sam.
Sure.
So once the ad revenue goes away, we're under $100 a month, which means no news show. All right.
Well, let's see. Well, I guess make sure it's a really good news show. We'll see if I keep going.
All right.
Oh God! So now we kind of have to do the show, don't we?
Well, I do want to say that it is interesting how things like Patreon and Kickstarter have really bolstered the creative community, whether it's podcasters or artists, and you're starting to see projects that get funded that I don't necessarily know would have ever seen. When I worked in broadcasting, Heathen Talk wouldn't have, we would have fought to get on community radio, and that's free. And
Yeah.
sometimes you pay to get on community radio.
Well, and similarly, like with the Illustrated Hávamál, I mean, I know several publishers because I work as a fantasy illustrator, so I mean, I understand the process. But yeah, trying to pitch to a publisher, hey, there's this 1,000-year-old ancient text, and I think we should do a book about it with pictures. I don't think they'd have jumped on board for that. But what I'm experiencing with the Kickstarter, and part of the reason I think that it did fund so quickly, is there's a desperate need in the Heathen community for quality materials. I mean, there's a few books out there. It's not like you can't get a copy of the Hávamál, but because of how printing works or self-publishing, they're usually fairly flimsy books or that sort of thing. And I wanted to publish a book that I'd feel good about pulling out during a ritual, because I mean, Toby's talked about this some on the show a little bit, and I know you guys published the articles on Reddit about parts of ritual, and one of those parts is having the right props really does help direct the energy and make it feel like you stepped into that other space, the sacred space. And when someone pulls out, like a PDF iPad copy of the Hávamál to read the quote, or whatever quotes you guys, people are reading from, and to be fair, I've seen a lot of groups where the orator will have it memorized. But I just wanted something that felt nicer than all that.
I mean, ritual implements, the proper ritual implements, the best ones that you can find are a way of communicating something, and it's both to the people in the ritual, meaning you are communicating your collective luck, your collective wealth, but also to outwardly, and it's displaying the level of commitment you have, which layers into that whole idea of communication. And thanks for the plug. If you guys are interested, Reddit is I'm currently doing a weekly essay on Reddit about ritual.
We're at, what, part 4 now?
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy those two. So
Maybe we can get them on the Heathen Talk site. We'll see. Now, I will say, as someone who, my background is performing arts, and of course, pretty much every single one of our performing arts has its roots in religious ritual. It is important to have that mind space. It's kind of like, we talked, and I think we've had the conversation here. I know we as a group of us hosts and stuff have had this conversation about what you wear to ritual, and it's always, the best you can. It's the same kind of thing. And I think that I really think that's such a good inspiration for it because, we are lacking because we're such a niche market, it can be, and you're just not going to make as much money off of us. You just don't have we really are dependent on individual artisans and craftsmen versus, mass published, there's no Lifeway Heathen store.
Oh, that's funny.
I thought about starting one.
Please don't.
As Sam lives in the South,
not just that. Lifeway is in Nashville, where I live, and my mother is actually a Methodist minister and editor for the United Methodist Publishing House, which is also in Nashville. So I'm actually very familiar with Christian publishing in my background in that respect, and I hope that no one does that to Heathenry ever.
Let's try not to turn it into a commodity for profit.
Well,
knock off logo shirts about Heathenry like you get at Jesus.
We already have those.
Yeah,
I'll say we sell those.
That's different.
Heathen gag gifts are fine. It's another when we try to have a so-called official group of people indoctrinate what it is that an individual kindred or person should believe or talk about when they get together. And I think that's regardless, as much as I've seen, on the Reddit forums, people get, blasted for telling people they're doing it wrong. Obviously, that's the slogan of your show, and those sorts of things. You guys make it very clear, and Heathenry in general, I find, it likes the idea that there are ways that don't sit right with you, but in general, what's good for you and your group of people that you're together with, that's good. That's enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the minute you start getting into the idea of a giant publishing company or really even national organization, I think it gets a little outside of that. But that's probably a whole another conversation than what we're talking about today.
Well, no, I think it's a fair bit. Or a fair topic. We are very small, and the idea that we would go out and make money or a living.
Sorry about that.
Go out and make money based on our religion, I think is the wrong way to go about it. Heathenry costs me money, a lot of money. I'm happy to pay it. It's a sheer joy to be able to have the resources to do these things, and that's kind of like the difference between what I see, in some cases where it's you're gonna buy my book or trying to sell things versus, hey guys, I really believe in this project. I've done this. I'd like to bring this to you. We've got to collectively pay for it, which is a completely different thing and something that I really respect, and I'm very happy to see be successful, such as with the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I do actually struggle with that to some degree. Some because of my background. But one is just in general, it's sometimes it's hard to put the hat out. It's hard to say I've done this thing, I've made this performance, and now it's time for the interaction. The thank you, the back and forth. Which there's actually a really great book on that particular topic. If any of our viewers are interested in delving deeper, by Amanda Palmer, she did a book called The Art of Asking, which delves into the whole. She did the TED Talk that went viral, so a lot of people probably see that. But in the book, she really delves into what it's like to be someone who's in the community. And what she says actually in the book, now I didn't think about this beforehand, but man, it ties in so perfectly with Heathenry. When we look at the tribal structure, there was always one or more people within the tribe that were the lore keepers and the performers and the artists, right?
Mhm.
And they were supported by the tribe because what they did had value. They were a part of the community, and that's really what the book is largely about. It's about participating in a community, in some cases even building a community, but participating as an artist, and that what's involved in that. And that's one thing I feel like with doing the Hávamál project opened up a whole different conversation, at least for me, with heathens, both online and in person. As I was going through it, and I don't know, I really like the idea and that concept of, I'm not gonna lie, I draw because I like to draw, I paint because I like to paint, and I've managed to make a career out of doing those things. So I mean, I am very much a professional, but the reward that I get from participating in heathenry and being able to bring my art to that aspect is so much greater than just when I get an assignment for a D&D book or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this isn't the first. I mean, you've got the whole FatefulSigns.com. You've got the whole Norse mythology themed piece, but this is also not the first explicitly heathen project that you've done. You've and I think we've talked about it, but I think it's worth bringing up. You've done art for actual temples in the past.
Yes, the Odinist temple that built in Newark, England, not New England, but England, Britain. I saw a thing go out online that they were looking for artists, and I submitted, and they were actually shocked. At first, they were like, "We didn't think we'd get professional artists submitting to this sort of thing." It's actually commonly something people are surprised by. Either they're not so much. My artist friends are never surprised that I'm heathen, but heathens are often surprised, or paganism in general. They are surprised that I'm a professional artist, and I think it comes back to where we were talking earlier about there's a lot of non-professional artists and writers that rely on paganism to varying degrees for their income.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that's good and fine, and some of it does feel a bit like, I don't know, a bit forced. And so, yeah, to have someone who's like, yeah, I do this for a living, but I'm also heathen. But I actually think that's what makes heathenry so exciting right now, is that we're in a time where the growth of heathenry is such that there are professional people that are involved in heathenry. I think, in the past, my perception of paganism growing up, because I did encounter some pagans, and I've always been involved in the convention circuit to some degree, and paganism and cons go hand in hand. It was always this idea that it was, the same guy who, not to stereotype, but is playing D&D and collecting comic books in his mother's basement also happens to be pagan, and it kind of gets a bad rap for that reason, and sometimes that's justified. But I think heathenry, oh man, this statement could piss some people off, but here we go. I think heathenry is what happens when pagans grow up, and because it's an actual religion for grown-ups, that you have professionals that are participating in it, and that's we're seeing what happens with that in the community at large, and to me it's very exciting to see it grow like that. And I mean, I've only been participating for a very short time, long term compared to some of you guys, but already in the time I participated, I've seen a lot of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And just so you know, a week from Friday or so, I will be at a convention with Sam because I am one of those D&D players. So yeah.
There's a difference between playing D&D, which I've done, and making it your identity.
Yeah. But no, I totally, as somebody who's gone to conventions for almost 20 years, totally can back up what you're saying there. I believe I once made a statement at a certain convention that shall remain nameless but no longer exists, where I walked in a room and went, "Oh my God, it smells like D&D in here."
Yeah.
I think that something that I think, we're within Heathenry, it's nice that we have these professionals because let's face it, if being a professional heathen is not something that is viable even for the most widely, if you look at, probably I would argue that Diana Paxson has probably published more books than any other heathen author as far as sheer number of books.
Mm-hmm.
So mainly because she has a major publishing house behind her. But she doesn't make her money on heathen books. Her money's on her, her fantasy stuff that she writes. Because you're just not going to make your money running a heathen nonprofit or being a heathen author or any of that. It's just not.
I also think that is some of the appeal with the Illustrated Hávamál. We've talked a lot about the heathen and pagan community that's been supporting me. But I've also had a lot of academics come out of the woodwork. And my wife is the graphic designer for the book, and she's worked out a way that I'm about 90% sure we're going to have the original Old Norse in the book, because to date that's the most requested thing I've gotten is, would you please include the original language as well as the translation? And I mean, obviously the original Old Norse is also in the public domain. So, I mean, it's certainly older than 1934 or whatever, 1936. So, I mean, there's no legal reason not to. But that's the other thing about a book like the Hávamál is, it's not just a heathen text. It's a academic text. It's a historic text, and it has value to people across a lot of different fields. So like what I've found is there's a decent amount of people who've contacted me talking about the academic nature of the work. There's a large group of people talking about the spiritual nature of the work, and then there's also people who just really enjoy the artwork, who have been fans of me from various game products that I've worked on over the years, who just think it's really cool to see it applied to the book. And what I like about the Hávamál in general is it's kind of like Ben Franklin's book of wise things for your life. It's like the Farmer's Almanac or whatever, where it's like, check behind a door when you walk into a room. Someone might be there to stab you. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's good advice. You don't want to get stabbed. And so like it's very practical in a way. And I think people for that reason it has appeal beyond the heathen appeal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
it's interesting about academic because Ben Wagner, who has translated a lot of sagas, is the biggest purchaser of his stuff. It's not heathens, it's colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Academic textbooks, and I find that that is kind of, because we're kind of a very we can be kind of academically rigorous sometimes. That I definitely see that overlap.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, we as heathens, we often study academic journals and dissertations in order to learn more about our religious practices. It only makes sense that it would work the other way, right?
Absolutely. I've got one of my good friends here in Boise is a professor of English, and he's been fascinated by Norse mythology as a literature, as a category of literature, and he has an extensive library of not only just the primary sources but also commentaries and whatnot. And they're interesting conversations because it's two people talking about the same thing but not using the same language. And luckily we kind of are able to make that kind of bridge that gap. But there's lots of different reasons why somebody would be interested in this.
I mean, to go to that point too, I think it's also why, I mean, at its core, I mean, popular culture and like D&D, those things at this point are tied very directly to Tolkien, and Tolkien was so steeply deeped in the lore of the Germanic people that what I find is when people actually, for religious reasons or otherwise, sit down and read some of the stories from the Prose Edda or the Poetic Edda, they always relate to them in a way that feels so true, and it's because these are just the stories of our people and our culture going back for 1,000 years or more at this point, and so that excites people. For some people, that's academically. Others recognize the spiritual value, and others just say, "Man, that's a good story. It really resonates with me." And I think that's partly why Heathenry has such a growth right now is because it's so easy to make that leap between, man, when I heard these stories, it clicked with me in a way that no religious text ever has before. I mean, we're not talking about deserts and people wandering around with camels. The stories are about horses and bears and trees and mountains and things that I grew up with and make sense to me. And it just resonates.
Maybe that's why everybody loves the Jackson Crawford's joke edition, the Cowboy Hávamál, so much.
Probably.
Yeah, I can see that. So, Sam, we've been talking a little bit about the project. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the process? Because I know you had a very specific process in regards to how this project came about. And I think it would be very interesting for our listeners to hear a little bit about that.
So it goes back to a convention I went to in Pennsylvania called AluxCon, which is a gathering of specifically for imaginative realism, which is the modern art name for fantasy art. And some of the greats are there. In the intro, we jokingly talked about Boris Vallejo and the comparison with Viking and Norse art. Boris Vallejo and his wife Julie Bell are at this event, and they're lovely people. I've actually studied under Boris Vallejo and both of them, and that's the kind of caliber of artist that's at this event. And one of the guys that was there is Rick Barry, and he did an amazing lecture on the art of the subconscious and how basically scientifically, if we tap into the subconscious, what starts to happen with our art really changes. It really changes the conversation. And so what I mean by subconscious, actually the easiest analogy is when you look up at the clouds and you see a dragon or a face or any number of things, that's your subconscious kicking in to try and make sense out of the randomness, because it's our natural, we look for faces, we look for hands, we look for sharp color contrasts, and all those things were developed so that we wouldn't die in the wilderness, basically. But we still rely on those things when we look at pictures. So when you look at a picture, often the first thing you're looking for is where are all the faces, hands, and in another way, where's the danger? But for me, I wanted to tap into the subconscious, which I believe is how we interact with the divine. My personal belief is that each of us has, for the word I would use to describe it is fetch. Guardian spirit might be another way of saying it. It could be a Deseer or an Alfar if you want to connect it ancestrally. But almost every tribal religion and even many non-tribal religions have a word to describe this, be it muse or spirit, and that through connecting with that, we can relate and tap into the other, to the spirit world, to our ancestors, however you want to frame that. And I know this is getting a bit out there and esoteric, but I think it's important that we talk sometimes about those concepts, because it's easy for us to rely on the analytical side of, like, I love highlighting things in books and then writing notes about why I highlighted them. And so for me, I had to develop a process that tapped into all these things. And so basically I just would take a piece of paper and make a bunch of random ink blobs, as much as, just on the paper, all over the place. And I actually did a YouTube video on it, if you want to see me kind of in the process of making one of these. But, I mean, I break out a toothbrush, I'm slinging stuff at the thing. I take out a spray bottle and spray it with water so that weird shapes happen. At this point, I'm not really thinking too much about what's happening. Then here's where, for me, the religious part kicks in. Is I'd take the text and I have it printed out so that I can tack it above my board where I'm working, and then I go to my personal altar, and I have a little meditation table, and I would light one candle to call to the gods and spirits of inspiration. Specifically, I would sometimes focus specifically on Odin. Sometimes it was more general, but basically tapping into Wode, tapping into the fury of inspiration that is represented there. And I'd light a candle to my ancestors, because I believe very much we are the sum of our own actions, but also the actions of our ancestors. And so I wanted to channel that. And then I'd light a candle for meditation, and that was just for me to stare into. And I'd think about the text. I'd really start to analyze it, see what sorts of symbols or ideas came in, and then I would go back and approach the ink. And well, first I'd take a pencil and I'd try and find what sort of faces or shapes were within in the page, and then I'd go in with ink and pull them out more and more, just trying to intuitively go with what was happening and where it went. Occasionally, I would do it if the particular verse was specifically related to a god or goddess. I would make an offering, a small offering related, in order to fuel some creativity, to get some inspiration. And that's actually a common part of my practice. When I do a piece on a god or a goddess, I will, I don't know, I find that, like, when you spend time with the art, it's very much like a meditative process of thinking about the concept, of these things, and it can really get quite deep. It's quite hard to verbalize all this stuff, and I even sound a little weird to myself saying all these things, because it is so much. It's just, it's intuitive, even to the point where several of the pieces, when I'd finish, I would actually feel like someone else had done them, because I made choices or did things that I don't usually do. And if you go and look at samflegal.com, is my illustration site, so you can see some of the art I've done for games like Warhammer and Legend of the Five Rings, and then you can compare it to the stuff I'm doing with Fateful Signs and with the Hávamál, and you'll see a big difference in feel, really. Not so much in scope, but in feel. And what I found is people react very strongly to the work I've done with Fateful Signs, and obviously with the Illustrated Hávamál. So clearly it's working, but yeah, it's quite an involved process. But it also, while explaining it, I should say it's quite involved to explain. The actual act of doing it is, you light 3 candles, you think about something for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you go draw. So it's also incredibly simple in that way, which is also important. I mean, if it was really complicated, I probably would not continue to do it.
That's the thing. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say that I happen to own lots of the books that Sam has illustrated. Because of Gamer Elf, I've got L5R. It's really funny. I was looking earlier, going, okay, yeah, I've got that, we've got that. But then again, my husband, that's how I met my husband at a game shop 15 years ago. But yeah, I definitely would, as somebody who's one kind of a non-visual art kind of person, my brother got all of that talent in the family. And two, as kind of the other, as kind of somebody who's a big fan, at the same time I have a lot of criticism for that particular genre, and that's a whole nother show and a whole nother topic.
We talking chainmail bikinis? Is that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I really enjoy Sam's game art. I enjoy that fantasy art, but this is, to be honest, I don't know that if you told me, you gave me these 2 pieces of art and said, these, are these the same artist, I would go yes. Granted, I don't know how to, forensically examine art or whatever, but I definitely can see to me, there is a difference, and it's, like I said, I really I'm enjoying kind of hearing about your process on that because it is different. It's such different art comparatively.
Yeah, I mean, even just in how it's requested. I mean, like for game art, it's could you draw this orc smashing a knight's helmet in? And already, even as a non-artist, you probably have a much more clear picture than if I read you some poetry and asked you what it makes you think about. And that's really the difference between the two.
So the you mentioned something a little bit earlier, and I kind of want to go back to it. The concept of it's both very moving and it's very simple, and the interesting thing and the thing that I found particularly telling there and something that I want to underscore is from the inside looking out, it's very hard to explain. From the outside looking in, you can't understand it. That's Hunder's explanation of what it's like to be a Texas Aggie also applies to Thadish belief or heathenry in general, but it really applies to a spiritual experience. Spiritual experiences tend to be intensely private and intensely moving, and then when you share those experiences, sometimes you go, when you're done talking, you're like, well, that wasn't as impressive at the moment. I guess you just had to be there, which is the whole point. You have to be there. And I thought it was very important to underscore. I mean, personally, I don't talk spirituality, not because I don't have those experiences or share them, but largely because if I told you about the spiritual experience I had, you're like, so you went and got some burger and fries.
Well, this is actually one of the things, like in art, and in this case, I mean art with a big A, so writing, dancing, the arts. We often talk about this. Stephen King actually has a great quote in his book on writing, where he says, if you get a whole bunch of professional, really successful writers together and ask them where their ideas come from, the truth is they don't fucking know. I mean, that's really like what it comes down to, because creativity it's this flow, and sometimes I'm working on one project and suddenly I get an idea for another. Like one thing I do, I read a lot of academic texts, mostly so far that have been recommended by Toby. I just finished Sacral Kingship in Anglo-Saxon England, the one that you had recommended about a month ago, Toby. Mm-hmm. And as I'm reading through that, that's where, if you look on my Facebook feed, I just posted up a picture today I'm working on of a horned god, and there's a whole section in there about how at Yule time the king or chieftain would don horns as a part of the ceremony, and that got me thinking about, man, like I feel like that's some of the religious practice or ceremony that some of modern heathenry lacks. We don't necessarily have the right mask or tool or whatever. We're still going a lot on feel, but like if you were at a ritual where a dude donned horns right before doing the ritual, and everybody knew it was going to happen, so it wasn't like a funny thing, but it had the gravitas that it was meant to have, and so that got me excited about this painting about the horned god and the correlation, or the horned king, which led me down this whole other path. And so in a way, like, that's where ideas come from, which is to say, at the same time, nowhere. Like it's just, going down. Another painting I'm really excited to do at some point, I've been reading Odin, the One-Eyed Gon, and the Indo Manor Bunda. I always say that wrong. And there's a whole section in there where it correlates the Harlequin to Odin, and that Carnival, and therefore by extension Mardi Gras, is a festival related to the Germanic tradition. And that got me thinking about, like, holy crap, how awesome would it be to have a painting that had the trappings of Mardi Gras or Carnival, the checkered patterns, the Harlequin clown mask, and those sort of things, but then laid over the top of that the symbols that we're used to, like the Harlequin mask was actually missing an eye, and had some ravens connected to it, and just like all these other things that bring you in. It's actually like one of the pieces for the Hávamál that went like this for me was I knew the first line of Odin hanging on the tree. It begins, I ween that I hung on a windy tree, hung there for nights full 9. And most people, I think, know that particular verse, or whatever translation. It's verse 139. So it'd be introducing a section of the Hávamál that was super important to most people. I mean, a lot of people have different takes on the Hávamál. I certainly don't think it's the Heathen Bible or anything like that. But man, you read that section on Odin hanging from the tree and all the runes he can cast, and that's some cool shit. Like, you get, you read it and you get excited about it. So I knew it had to have intensity. And I can't remember the book I was reading. I think it was by H.R. Ellis Davidson, where it was talking about the connection between Odin and Yggdrasil, the world tree, and that, Odin, some of Odin's bynames are like that he's the tree rider, and that he, in some context, actually is the world tree, and that you can't separate the concept of Odin entirely from the concept of the world tree. And so that got me thinking of, like, man, what if Odin is the tree? What if he's, he hung himself from the tree, but is a part of the tree? And that's where the piece that I did, that's it's been the most popular piece from the Hávamál, where you can't really tell the difference between Odin's robes and the tree. He stabbed himself through on the tree, but it's all connected, and then the blood flowing out of him actually becomes the well at the base of the tree as well. And so, like, stuff like that starts to happen when I see it, and as you can tell, it gets me very excited about picture making and trying to translate those things. But so much of what this project was about is, how do you take poetry that by its very nature has no visual concept? Like, the idea of Odin as the tree has no concept. It's much easier for us to understand Odin as the man with a hood or with one eye, or even as the king atop his pale horse. These ideas are much easier for us to grasp, but the poetry goes beyond those things. Which also forced me to research a lot of the kinnings. It's one of the things I really like about Bellows' version of the Hávamál. As much as I know that modern translations are better, Bellows left really good notes about why he did the things that he chose to do. And so, that was helpful getting into all of that stuff. Anyway, I feel like I just went off on a huge, long rant there.
Yeah, but you just brought up your next... sorry, is anybody else getting that echo? There we go. It sounds like you just brought up your next project, though. Just go collect all the kennings for Odin and draw Odin as each one.
Oh man, I suppose I could group a lot of them for that reason.
I do got to say, though, with the idea you had there about the Germanic carnival, you may have just lit upon the only legitimate use of chainmail bikinis in heathen art.
Possibly. I don't know, that the section where it talks about the wild hunt and the parade that people used to do, in honor of the wild hunt, it made me both really sad for what basically Halloween has become, but also kind of excited that there is a potential for more.
I want to go back to something you said, because it seemed kind of important to me, I'm not going to lie, and that is, and I apologize, guys, I turned off my mixer, so I'm trying to adjust my volume on the fly, and that is talking... Whoa.
You sound fine to me right now, for what it's worth, Lauren.
Okay. So, and that is specifically wanting to talk about, you mentioned that, where you see these depictions of people in ritual costume, they're wearing the horns or this, that, and the other, and it's something that in modern heathenry, I've really seen a lot of people skate away from and kind of shy away from. Now, I have my own theories as to why. I kind of think it's partial because we're still in that backlash phase of we are not general neo-paganism, so anything that remotely looks or smells like general neo-paganism we run far away from.
Sure.
But I wanted to, as someone who works in symbolism, I kind of wanted you to kind of go a little deeper into that.
You want me to talk about making pictures based on that, or having people actually do that in a ritual?
Both, all of it. Just your thoughts on it. You
All right.
started in on it, and I want to hear more.
So yeah, I shy away from that some as well, because on the flip side, and we'll throw the drinking words out here: overculture and Christian baggage.
Cascadia.
Yeah, you have a guy, with horns in a robe in the middle of the wood, and that's Satan worship, or that's the devil, and those sorts of things. But the symbol of the stag, as it's connected with kingship and leadership, is so well documented that it continued to be used throughout Christianity. And so I guess we have that choice of, like, do we want to I don't know, I think that's why people like the Volk nut and the horns that we drink from drinking horns, because otherwise symbol, if we were drinking from a chalice, which there's plenty of historical evidence to show that, particularly in Anglo-Saxon England, they used a chalice rather than a horn, but that feels an awful lot like taking communion when you start passing around a cup full of alcohol as opposed to a horn, right? So some of the choices we make in modern heathenry are very clearly so that, like, we are different, not just from modern paganism, but from our Christian roots. But those fears run deeper. In fact, I'm even surprised sometimes how deep they go. There's things going on in my family that means older relatives are currently giving me a lot of their stuff, and I'm taking them. And one of those things was the family Bible, and man, that it feels really weird. Like, a part of me wanted to destroy it, like just take out the family history section and preserve that. But then it's like, I'm not big into the concept of book burning in general, but there's something about, I was just raised the importance of the Bible, that even though I feel now that it's utter ridiculous nonsense between those two hardcovers, there's something about the family nature of it, and I don't know, there's an importance there. So you're right, Lauren, like, some of those things we just shift around. I think another thing, in addition to the horn thing, so if you haven't read the Odin the One-Eyed God, it goes into pretty specific ideas that the parade through town, like the idea of the eight-legged horse was probably, four dudes who were wearing a horse costume walking through town, and the spiritual horse was always white. That's how you could tell the difference between the spiritual horses and the regular horses was color. There was also typically a werewolf, which actually harkens to the modern idea of Krampus, where you have this guy in a demon costume who gets to drink all the beer. That's basically what the werewolves were allowed to do, is, in the parade, they ran through and drank beer. And if you go back even further, there's even further reason for these things that would take a little bit more to go into. But the connection between Odin and the wolf and all this stuff, and to me that gets me really excited. Like, I would love to go to a Yule parade, even a modern Yule parade, where you had, like, a guy on stilts in a Krampus costume, and someone dressed up as Odin on a white horse, even if it was like a ridiculous papier-mâché white horse, and all those sorts of things. It just, the other thing, though, that I also take away is that many of these symbols and ideas survived beyond the Christianization, so they are still there in a way. But yeah, I don't know. I wish there was a way to bring some of that stuff out. I think it's just because of the small nature, at least of the heathenry that I've participated in the South. It's typically a group of people gathered around a fire, either at a state park or in someone's backyard when they have a little more property than most folks. And I have been involved in one ritual that did actually use masks, but that was a big part of Yule, as it's connected to the wild hunt, was the idea that the donning of the masks was to become connected to the ancestors and represent the ancestors being present at Ritual. And yeah, those ideas get me very excited, both about heathenry and about picture making, and how to convey those ideas in a way that hopefully makes other people excited to either research them further, or just to ask me why I painted it, so I could go on this tirade about telling them why.
So to respond, the Yule processions do happen from time to time. You really need at least 30 to 40 people to make it work.
Sure.
That's like bare minimum. What I have found in those situations, that it's best that those who participate in the Yule procession as the Wild Hunt remain the Wild Hunt through the entirety of that event. So there's definitely something to having a body of people that can support having 10 people leave and for the rest of the night. But those things are a natural progression of just building numbers and building a level of serious grown-up heathenry that we can participate in these things, and we can attempt these things and learn our do's and don'ts, because there are do's and don'ts, and it's really just a certain level of getting the people together and getting the situation right, and getting a certain level of commonality, like just understanding where the limits are and what's taboo and what's not taboo, and not having to constantly explain what is taboo and what is not taboo.
Yeah, right. I feel like that conversation, at this point, though, like I've yet to go to a heathen event without a new heathen being present, right, or someone interested in heathenry. And so that is actually a critique I had when I was first starting out, is I feel like, man, I wish someone had pulled me aside and told me some of the do's and don'ts right off the bat.
I think where we're at right now with like trying to lead into the kind of stuff you're talking about is it's kind of like we've seen something but don't know anything about it, and we're trying to recreate it almost from first principles. It's like you show somebody who's never even heard of a car, you show them a car, and then they try to recreate the car. They don't create a car right from the beginning. They start with 4 wheels and a frame and see how that works, and they keep adding things to it and finding out the parts that don't work and finding out the parts that do work. And in 100 years, you've got a decent car. But you don't have a car in the first 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's also, though, just a matter of not everyone is either ready or exposed to delving that deep. When heathenry is good and when it's bad, it can often just be drinking with your friends, and that aspect of heathenry, I don't know. I think it takes away some of the gravitas, of the event. But on the flip side, just putting on a pair of horns and a robe and going out doesn't necessarily add more to the event unless everyone understands why that's happening.
And it's a critical mass of people. I mean, not everybody has to understand. But enough people have to understand so that the new person for everything, this is all weird, has somebody safe that they can go to and say, what just happened?
Right.
I think that comes down to, we've talked about, festivals and events and stuff. I think that comes into being a good host, being a good event runner, or whatever, however you want to put it, is setting those expectations and explaining to new people, we're doing this and this is why, and if you have questions, you can talk to this person or that person. And really a ritual can sometimes may be made or broken by just that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Because if enough people don't know what's going on, like if I went to a ritual that was all performed in Spanish, I don't speak Spanish very well, I would be completely lost. But if someone explained it to me and said, hey, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, then, okay, I don't speak the language, because really, it can be a completely different language.
And I think an even simpler explanation, too, is when I was a kid, I was curious what Catholics did, and so I had a friend who took me to the Catholic Church, and all she prepped me for was don't touch the holy water, and when everybody stands, you stand. When everybody kneels, you kneel. And there's a point where only Catholics get to do stuff, and I'll tap you on the arm when that happens. And I was like, all right. And I think heathenry can basically work the same way, where as long as, when one person's doing it, you just stay quiet, but when everyone does it, you do what everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually just going to bring up the Catholic parallel, too. It's a really good one, especially for how long they spent doing their masses in a language that nobody outside of the clergy really understood.
Sure. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, so okay. So again, the concepts of ritualism, symbolism, and art with a capital A, that really comes down to the idea of communication and sharing those things and communicating those emotive responses.
Actually, Toby, just to pause right there, that's actually the best definition of art I've ever been able to give, is that art is communication.
Mm-hmm.
So often, people are like, oh, what is art? Particularly with the movement of abstract expressionism and all that kind of stuff throughout the 1900s, the modern art movement, people used to know what art was before abstract movement, but then we got to this point where, like, art was cerebral, and so if you weren't, thinking about it, what was art? And that really, that is all art is, in any of its forms, is its communication.
Mm-hmm.
Well, luckily the Dadaists came in and rescued us from all that.
Did they?
What's Dada? Dada.
No, I got sidetracked. So,
Sorry.
no worries. What do you see in the future of heathen art? I mean, we've talked a little bit about what you want to do in the future, or some of the future projects. But what do you think is? Do you see like a resurgence in heathen art? Do you think that your successful Kickstarter is a presage of things to come, or do you feel like that this was a combination of several different factors, and this is kind of like that something that's inherently built up in you, and be honest, and don't be afraid to be a little to stroke your own ego, because I honestly think that no one else in heathenry right now could have made this happen the way that you did. But
So,
I'd like.
Yeah, I think there's really two questions there. I think for like what I see for the future of heathen art, or where heathen art is going, is there's a lot of carpentry being done, a lot of carving, particularly related to people like little statues or totems for their house whites, or for the whites around their home. I see people carving god poles to place, with wherever their kindred gathers regularly. And then just the craftsman's nature, particularly back when the 9 noble virtues were more prevalent. There was this idea that everybody had to do everything for themselves, and so the whole do-it-yourself heathen thing was really big. So I mean, I think that side of heathen art is both alive and well, and I think it's all wonderful stuff too. I do want to say that, like, I don't think it's lesser in any form. There's some amazing carving that's going on in heathen art, and I think there's this idea of, with reconstruction, in the same way where we're trying to reconstruct the religion, in a way we're trying to reconstruct the art to understand what came before. What really excites me in my own art, and what I would love to see from heathen art, is the modern extrapolation of those things. So, like, I am a reconstructionist to some degree, but I also agree that this is a modern religion. We need it to be accessible to people who don't want to read tons and tons about the lore, who just want to hear it from a storyteller at a ritual, or who are a part of the community. It will not be a true religion if it's only a religion of academics. And in the same way, not everybody can be an artist, but I really get excited about the idea of trying to understand the symbolism behind the words and the concepts of heathenry, and bringing it forward into a modern context. I am influenced by Boris Vallejo, by Frank Frazetta, by Brahm, and by even other artists. I've been looking at a lot of John Clement's work, who was a portrait painter in Britain in the 1800s, and so like you have all these influences, and heathenry is just one of those influences for me. But I'd like to see more people take it seriously. I like the Viking brawl art. I actually have a good buddy who's done a lot of those shirts that say like Odin doesn't love you, he doesn't care what happens to you, or something like that, or all those black T-shirts, the Valhalla T-shirts, and all that stuff. It's actually my close friend does the art for all those shirts, and I like that stuff too. But that's not heathen art. You see, and that's the difference. Is just because someone is inspired by the poetic Edda, or excited by the tales, or even they just read Marvel Comics and suddenly wanted to know more about Thor, and then they make art based on all that stuff. That doesn't make it heathen art. To me, to be heathen art, it needs to have the religious context as well. And I'd love to see, like we talked when Brian Marshall was on the show. Brian Marshall is a horn carver. Our process, even though the end result is completely different, our initial process is very similar, where it's about meditating on these concepts and trying to figure out what symbols do we have and what symbols feel right when you're trying to depict a god, goddess, or one of the whites in any fashion. So as for could anybody else do what I did, I don't know if they could have, because they didn't do it, I did. And so
that's the best answer ever.
And I like I said before, I think it's coming together of a lot of things. I've been participating a lot more online in heathenry. So yeah.
I gotta say, I always find the process of other artists fascinating, just because it is so different. It's the process and influences. Like, to be clear, I want to point out with that ad copy that I actually do like Boris Vallejo's art.
Sure.
I really do. I just don't think the heathen art needs to look like it was airbrushed on the side of a van.
Right. Yeah.
But no, it's like, seriously, listening to different artists. I mean, if you get 10 artists in a room and ask them how they went about doing something, you get 11 different answers. It's like, I've been listening to a series from Lawrence Santoro about a story he was trying to write and how he came to the creation of that story. I know that when I create art in the various modes that I use, I can't do it unless there's an element of science involved, or it just doesn't work out if I can't find the scientific element to it. But then I get guys like you that talk about how you can meditate on a concept and come up with the beginnings of a project, and I just can't even begin to imagine that.
Well, so let me add to that, because that is actually a great point. Because I did say, like, we don't know where our ideas come from, and that's true to a certain degree. But I've also found creativity, the creative part of your brain, or tapping into the subconscious, it's a skill. As much as it is anything. I actually don't believe that art is a talent in the sense of like you're just born with this ability to do it. What I do believe is you're born with a passion for it, and that passion drives you to figure out how all this shit works. And so with that idea of where do the ideas come from, it's all about creating a process. I show up to work every day at 8 a.m. and I work till 5 a.m. And the nice thing is that I feel creative at 8 a.m. every single day, and even if I don't, I still paint. And so what it is I've primed. It's like priming the pump. I'm working on creative things, so when creativity hits, I am ready to tap into it. I even keep a little idea journal, because as I'm reading books or doing other things, I'll get these ideas, and if you don't write them down right when they happen, you'll lose them. You know, a lot of times, I feel like creativity is very much like panning for gold, where so much of your ideas is just draining through, and you're just desperately trying to hold on to those few little nuggets before they too pass through the sieve.
Well, if you don't mind, we've got a few listener questions I want to get to. First of all, first question is from Robin. Do you find being a heathen artist affects your creative flow in any way? With the limit, especially if you're limited by source material at all.
Boy, I do feel it affects my creative flow, but only in a positive way. You know, the most difficult space to create something in is a vacuum. If someone comes to me and says, "You can make anything you want. What do you want to make?" That's really hard. You know, that's hard. But if I say, you know, I'd like you to do a picture of Odin, and then I come back with, well, which version of Odin are we talking about? What influences you? I mean, are we talking, even in a simple level, are we talking floppy hat Odin? Are we talking about like the Gandalf Odin? Are we talking about, you know, Wotan, who's more a death war god? Are we talking, you know, like there's so many different versions, and then we can have a conversation, and the more limitations that come into place, suddenly the easier my job has become to do that picture. And so, yeah, I think that's easy. The one thing, and no one's going to be surprised about this, the hardest thing about making heathen art is that if I fuck up something that is clearly in the lore or in the research, they let me know. And so, yeah, I have a few friends that I will run sketches by, because I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good about this, but I didn't like miss anything, because I do take creative leaps with things, and sometimes that's because there's not information, and other times it was because I didn't do my research. And heathens are fine with the one, but not with the other.
Yeah, I got to completely agree with you there. The limitations are kind of crucial, I think, for me as well. When the two art forms that I actually found I was any damned good at and kept up with were brewing and blacksmithing, and both of those are things where, you know, I need to have somebody start setting those limits on me or set them on myself. You know,
Right.
Brewing's what I do most often these days, and I don't care what anybody thinks out there. That's a damned art if you can do it well. And it's like, my most recent one was, you know, just an idea. It was winter time, and I kept going out and trying to buy winter ales, and I was unimpressed, so I wanted to make one.
Actually, you know, Thorin, that's actually another great way to figure out what your style is, because that's a question artists get a lot, is like, how do you determine your style? The easiest way to determine your style is to realize what you hate when you see other artists. You're like, oh, that's so fucking wrong. And you're like, that's an indication of where your style comes from. So,
Right.
yeah.
So another question, I'm going to kind of tie these two together because they're very similar, and it has to do with other work you might be interested in doing. First of all, somebody was wanting to know if you're possibly going to do something similar for the Anglo-Saxon poetics, perhaps something out of the Maxims, and then Scruffy Beardo wants to know if you're going to expand your illustrations to other Hávamál verses. So,
the first one, Toby is always trying to suggest Anglo-Saxon stuff that I should do. Maybe I'll get to that. I don't know. I mean, I certainly hope to live a very long and full life where all these projects are possible. But I also recognize that, you know, I can only do so much. It's actually, this will seem sort of an aside, but I'm very inspired by Jim Henson's career. And one of Jim Henson's biggest fears was that he wouldn't have enough time to create all the things he had ideas for. And over the last year or so, that started to happen with my career, where I used to struggle to bring the ideas, but now they're coming so quickly that I have to write them down just to keep up with them, and I already feel like there's not enough time. It's one of the things that excites me so much about the support for the Illustrated Hávamál, because that's a project I just wanted to do for myself, and now people are excited about it too. And if I could frame the majority of the rest of my career around doing the stuff I'm excited about and want to do and have people buy them, I will be a very happy man. As for, now what was the second question? Will I be? So I've done 31 verses. I'm doing 12 more because my wife Lorraine laid out the book and there were empty sections that just how the various verses fit together. So with the first 31 days, I didn't want to put, I just read a verse and I was like, okay, I like that verse, I want to do that verse, was how it started. The first 20 were very easy. Then it got a little harder where you're delving in, and now I'm at the point where I'm doing some of the sections of the Hávamál that are less exciting. Particular, I think you say it, Lod Fafnir's song, where I'm going to chant from the chanter's stool and hear my words and lend me your reed and all that section. It's very long-winded and much less direct than the sections of the Hávamál that tell you to look behind doors. And so yeah, it's getting a little bit headier. But there's going to be 12 more. I'm not going to do every single verse for sure, if that was the question. But it will be over 40 verses, all said and done, throughout the book. As well as I'm doing a companion book that shows the ink blobs that I initially did next to the final illustration as well, for people who want to just dive headlong into this thing with me.
All right. So Morgan wants to know, what is your advice for aspiring heathen artists?
So, I mean, it's really two questions, because it's the advice, whether you're heathen or not, the advice for artists is pretty much the same. I think the biggest, and it really depends. It's hard to answer this question not knowing where this person is in their career. But what I find is the phase that people tend to go through is there's a quality level. There is a professional quality bar, and that bar is actually pretty high in this day and age, particularly with the prevalence of not just like board game art like I do, but with video game art and movie concept art. We live in a really great time in the sense where more artists are currently being gainfully employed than in any time. We've actually gotten finally over, in my opinion, this concept of the starving artist, which came about with with Impressionism, actually. In the 1800s, there wasn't this idea of the starving artist. You went to a guild, you studied, you learned your trade, and you could survive as a portrait painter or a landscape painter, and that was just another job. It was like learning to be a carpenter or a mason. It was only when we moved art away, this is going to be my art history lesson for today, it was only when we moved art away from its natural place, in my opinion, which is to help people understand stories, that happened, where suddenly you have starving artists because they're creating art that's so cerebral that no one wants it. And so you have a few guys who managed to make a lot of money off of this concept, but most people don't. Well, now we've moved beyond that again, where we're back to the idea of art is just a job. Depending on where you are in your career, if you haven't picked a school, research your school very, very carefully. There is a lot of really terrible art schools that are fully ready to take your money. Things you're looking for is, particularly if you're interested in more illustrative art, do they even have a true illustration program with working artists? Or when you bring them your drawing of Thor, are they going to be like, yeah, that'd be great, maybe just splatter some paint over the top of that? So those sorts of things. If you've graduated already with an art degree, you just got to keep working, study. I'm a big believer in continuing education. I'm currently in a mentorship program where I'm studying under another illustrator named Dan DeSantos through the SMART School. That's SM Art School. And I also attended the Illustration Masterclass 3 different years in a row, which are both things you can check out online. But I'm a big believer in education, and that once you get beyond all that stuff to where you know the craft, the business side of this thing is also an art form in and of itself. That's something I talk about extensively on my podcast, which is called One Fantastic Week, where we delve with the ins and outs of the business of art. And I know that's something not everybody wants to hear about, so I'm just going to leave it as that. Then the heathen, the heathen side of things, it's really just about being true to your voice. You might have an idea about how a god or goddess looks, or a story, how you want to portray it, and don't rely on the tropes. One of the things I'm really starting, you can see it in the piece I did called Liberty or Death, where I did a Norse Valkyrie, but I told the story of the Valkyries in the symbols in her armor, and that's more and more the direction my heathen art is going, where I'm trying to rely less on dudes in Viking gear, because we know what the Vikings wore for the most part. I can do a version of Thor where he's got the tabard on and a big red beard, and everybody understands that that's Thor. But I also think in a modern context, Thor is so much more than that. So, don't be afraid to delve in. The other is, don't be a stranger is the other thing. There are art conventions, there are business conventions. Go to them, meet people. In the same way that heathenry is about community, life is about community. Participate in the community of your career, in your local community, and in your heathen community, and surround yourself with people. Now, that's not to say you just have to be immediately accepting of everybody. Don't. I believe that the phrase "a man is judged by the company that he keeps." So it's okay to judge people and understand who has worth and who does not have worth, but you have to meet people in the first damn place in order to make those judgments at all.
And to kind of tie in on that, one of us is. I don't know who.
I think you're good now.
Okay, to tie back in on that, how do you balance, kind of interpretation with UPG, with what is going on as far as, actual, lore and current heathen thought and all that kind of stuff?
That's tough, because I definitely, in order to make the art, you have to trust your instincts, and instincts are definitely more on the scale of UPG than they are on hard fact. But I also read a lot of the academic journals, and I try to stay abreast of what's happening in heathenry. I think with the art, it's more important to trust your gut and go with your voice than it is to worry about accuracy in the same way. But you also don't want to fuck things up. Like if you're doing a portrait of Tyr, the lore does specifically say which hand Tyr sacrificed, and it's important which hand that was, because it was the right hand, which was traditionally the fighting hand. So part of why he was so wounded is suddenly he had to fight with his left hand, and so you want to pay attention to those sorts of details. I don't know how accurately that answers the question, but it's something that I do think about and have to balance, but I almost always err on the side of letting the inspiration take over.
And I can totally see that as being a, from an art perspective, you're not necessarily, artists have always been given a little bit of more liberal room for interpretation than, say, a translator. Or
yeah, definitely. And also, that is to say, the point of my picture too is not to convert anyone. It's not to force anyone to think a certain thing. The point of the art is typically to make someone think about a concept. It's one of the things I love about art, is that what the viewer sees and interprets is just as valid as what I intended with the piece. And so again, because it's communication, even if someone looks at it and hates it and wants to critique and say that I did everything wrong, at least I made them feel something. So it's not dogmatic in that way, and I think that's the danger of UPG is when people try to push their UPG as dogma. That's where it becomes dangerous. UPG in and of itself, particularly among your local kindred and among your house cult. I mean, you guys always say house cult is inviolable, and that's the most UPG part of things. So there is a place definitely for UPG, both in art and in heathenry. It's just important to know what that place is.
Well, I mean, anytime you run up against a subject matter that people feel strongly about, and there are a few things that people feel as strongly about as religion, you're going to run into the interpretation question. You're going to get people screaming at you. But I can kind of understand how, from an artistic point of view, you have to let a few things go when you're looking at it, or when you're making it, for that matter.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough to sit at the table each day and keep working. I mean, most of these things take anywhere from 8 to 10 to 100 or 200 hours, depending on whether it's an oil painting or an ink drawing. I mean, when you have that kind of time invested, anything that becomes a barrier to creation that stops you from working is a negative thing.
I bet you've developed some thick skin.
Yes, I worked in marketing for 7 or 8 years before switching to illustration, so I'm very accustomed to working on 12 different logo ideas, tapping them up on a wall, having some jackass executive come in and hate them all. So, you pretty overcome the idea. That is the other thing about art, is even though I pour my heart and soul into it, once I've created it, the art is not me. Whether or not someone likes my art or what I've done does not have any impact on my personal self-worth. At least that's what I keep telling myself as a mantra.
Well, well, in the end, while you got to listen to everybody who takes in your art and hear what everybody has to say about it, you have to kind of look to the idea that not everybody's going to like it. And you have to realize that, do more people like it than don't like it.
And more importantly to me, I've come to realize too is there is no greater compliment than someone who spends money on what I've created. They take their hard-earned income and choose to buy a print or a piece of art or any of that stuff. And once you start to develop those kind of relationships, you start to realize that you're not having a conversation with everyone. Like, I'm not having a conversation with every person who's a heathen. I'm having a conversation with a few people, or maybe now a lot of people, thanks to Kickstarter, who understand what I'm doing to some degree or excited about what I'm doing. And that's another thing that changes the conversation as an artist. When you struggle to try and appeal to everyone, shit, not even just in art, just in reality, when you try to make everyone happy, all you end up doing is making yourself really sad, right? So if you can figure out who wants to play with you on the playground and you focus on those people, and the art becomes the dialogue between both of you, both as creator and user or enjoyer, then it's a very different conversation.
So I hate to cut this short, but we are very close to time. Sam, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show again. I appreciate you both as a person, as a sponsor, and as a fellow heathen. Where can we find your stuff? I mean, we say it every day, but I'm going to give you the chance to plug yourself.
Yeah, go to fatefulsigns.com and you can see all my various heathen and Norse-related artwork. I have a series I call Hodkin, which is my series on house elves. I have a series on the gods and goddesses, and now, of course, I have the Hávamál project, which is turned into the Kickstarter, which is the Illustrated Hávamál. There's a link on my website, but if you search for Illustrated Hávamál or just Hávamál on Kickstarter, there's not a lot of Hávamáls on Kickstarter right now, you're going to find the project. It is fully funded, so at this point, it's just pre-sale. If you want a book, heck, if you want 5 books, that's where you can go and get them. The print run is going to be based on the number of sales, so I will have some after the campaign, but I'm not going to have a ton of them. I don't want a garage more importantly, my wife also does not want a garage just stacked with Hávamál books. Yeah, I mean, if people are excited about the project or want to know more, also I'm on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, all those things, and you can find me. If you want to check out my show, it's called One Fantastic Week. Go to onefantasticweek.com. If you want to see my gamer art, you can go to samflegal.com. I think that about covers it. I'm very social media active.
He is. He actually retweeted when I put actually tagged him today on Twitter. So if you go to our Twitter, you can see him or the show post about today. We also have links on the Heathen Talk page to his Kickstarter and everything else. And if you're listening in the archives, it's up in the show notes as well.
We're going to throw up a link to his show as well, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks again. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. We appreciate it. Lauren, you're doing it wrong.
You're not the boss of me.
Have a good night, everybody.